In this story, when you hear this, it means turn the page. The Shoe People. Wellington saves the day. Puddle Villa was a very wet place, which was just the way Wellington liked it.
The wetter, the better,
was his motto, and he had a sign over the door saying just that. There was a muddy path from the front gate leading to his pride and joy. A huge swimming pool full of water. And in the middle of it, his playhouse. This was where Wellington lived. The swimming pool had a slide so that he could splash into the water, and there was a sailing boat, a rubber duck, and a beach ball, as well as a diving board. The more it rained, the happier Wellington was. Today was Wellington's kind of day. The wind howled and the rain poured. Wellington rubbed his hands with glee.
Just right for a walk,
he declared, and picked up his umbrella. This was a very special umbrella because it had lots of holes so that the rain could come through. He merrily splashed his way to the front gate. Water was running along the gutter, gurgling and burbling as it ran. Wellington danced his way along Shoe Street, singing to himself and making sure he jumped in all the puddles. He decided he'd call in at Tumbledown House to see his friend, Trampy. Trampy was staring out of a hole in one of his windows, looking at the rain. He waved to Wellington as he saw his friend come up the path. He opened the door to let Wellington in and offered him a cup of hot, fresh tea.
I won't stay long,
said Wellington.
It might stop raining, and I don't want to miss the chance to get thoroughly wet.
Trampy nodded at him, understandingly. Was there something special you came to see me about? He asked, sipping his tea.
I knew I'd come here for a reason,
smiled Wellington, who was apt to be a trifle forgetful at times.
I wanted to know if you'd like to come on a picnic.
Are you going to ask Margot and Sergeant Major? Asked Trampy. Wellington nodded. And Charlie?
I suppose so,
said Wellington.
But only if he agrees not to call me Welly. My name is Wellington. He always misses off the ending. It's most annoying.
I'm sure he'll behave, laughed Trampy. He loves picnics too much, but we can't go today. It's raining.
Perfect, said Wellington. Just right. Anyway, must dash, round to ask the others. Ready in half an hour?
Before Trampy could answer, Wellington was out of the door, still clutching his cup of tea. What about your tea? Asked Trampy.
Ah, yes,
said Wellington.
I'd forgotten about that.
He dipped his finger in his tea.
Oh dear,
he said.
Stone cold.
And with that, he drank it down in one gulp.
The wetter the better,
he cried, putting the teacup down and dancing off down the path, his umbrella whirling and dripping in the rain. The other Shoe People said much the same thing as Trampy. It was raining and you couldn't hold a picnic in the rain. However, it took Wellington such a long time to visit all his friends that by the time he'd finished, it had stopped raining and the sun had come out.
Oh, bother,
said Wellington, wading round in a lovely puddle at the side of the road.
This is too bad. What I want is wetness.
Never mind, said Margot, comforting him. Trampy can take us to the woodland waterfall. and you can get as wet as you want. Wellington's eyes lit up. That sounded like his kind of place. He helped Margot pack a big basket with lots of tasty homemade delights from her kitchen. Trampy, Sergeant Major and Charlie all arrived soon after. Sergeant Major was carrying an enormous rucksack on his back. "Whatever's that for?" asked Trampy.
"Emergency supplies,"
replied Sergeant Major, who always spoke very loudly because he'd been in the army so long. "We're only going for a walk in the woods," said Margot, smiling. "What kind of emergency were you thinking of?" Sergeant Major put down his rucksack and showed them what was inside.
"Shoe polish,"
he said,
"in case we get muddy and dirty."
He had black, brown, white, red, blue, green, yellow, and even colours they couldn't remember the names of. Sergeant Major liked to be all spick and span. Said Trampy, not entirely sure about all this. "What else have you brought?" Sergeant Major took out a clean uniform, a flag neatly folded, an inflatable rubber dinghy, and a box of sticking plasters. No one was quite sure what use it all might be, but Sergeant Major was so pleased with himself that it seemed a shame to tell him. Eventually, everything was ready for the picnic. Trampy, who knew all about nature and the countryside, led the way. He was always going for walks, so he knew all the best places and all the best ways to get there. They walked to the end of Shoe Street and then climbed over a stile into a field. Wellington liked that part especially, because there was lots of sticky mud about. When the music stops, turn your cassette over. Then they came to a footbridge that crossed over the river. "That's funny," said Trampy, looking down into the water. "With all this rain, I would have expected the river to be more full than that." They crossed the bridge and took the path into the woods. The ground was rather soft and squishy from the recent rain, but this suited Wellington perfectly. He was a proper gentleman, however, for whenever they came to a big puddle, he lifted Margot over it. Before long, they came to a small clearing in the trees. Trampy called them to a halt, put his finger to his lips, and said, "Shh." The others all went quiet. "If you listen carefully," said Trampy, "you can hear the sound of the waterfall." They all stood still and listened carefully. There were bees humming, birds singing, and leaves rustling. They all strained their ears, but none of them could hear the sound of the river bubbling along or the waterfall splashing down. "How very odd," said Trampy. "Never mind. I expect we'll hear it better when we're closer. Come on." They set off again. Soon, they arrived at the riverbank, just below the waterfall. But what a surprise was waiting for them. The riverbed was almost dry with only a few small pools of water. And as for the waterfall, barely a trickle was coming down.
"Not much of a waterfall,"
said Sergeant Major, unloading his heavy pack with relief.
"more of a water drip." "More of a water drip," said Trampy, unloading his heavy pack with relief.
"More of a waterfall," said Sergeant Major, unloading his heavy pack with relief. "More of a water drip," said Trampy, unloading his heavy pack with relief.
And Wellington, too, was a little disappointed that it wasn't as wet and splashy as he'd imagined. However, the muddy pools were fun to jump around in, and he happily danced off downstream. Charlie was more interested in starting to picnic, and Margot was looking at some beautiful flowers. "Look at these bluebells," said Margot with pleasure. "They're just like the ones in your garden, Trampy." But Trampy was looking somewhere else, and he was very worried. He stared up at the top of the waterfall and then turned to the others. "Listen," he said. "I think the rain has brought lots of loose rock and wood downstream, and it has blocked the river. If we don't clear it away, the river will overflow and Shoetown will be flooded." Sergeant Major stepped forward.
"I think this is an emergency,"
he said, proud to be proved right.
"Trampy and I will go and deal with it."
Before anyone could say a word, he set off to climb up to the top of the waterfall. Trampy raced after him. "Be careful, Sergeant Major," said Trampy, climbing quickly to catch up. "It could be dangerous."
"Don't worry,"
said Sergeant Major.
"They used to call me the Danger Major in the army. We'll soon have this waterfall spick and span again."
He reached the top. There, in the middle of the river, was a huge boulder, which was holding up a big tangle of rocks, stones, and broken branches. Sergeant Major strode boldly out to it in a determined fashion.
"Now see here, builder,"
he began, giving it a little push.
"I must insist that...
The boulder had suddenly come loose, with Sergeant Major still clinging onto it. It shot over the edge of the waterfall in a foaming torrent. Trampy tried to grab him, missed, slipped, and fell into the water as well. Both of them landed with an enormous sploosh in the river below and were swept away. Margot saw them straight away. "Sergeant Major's emergency supplies," she cried, and raced over to his rucksack. She pulled out the rubber dinghy, pulled the string marked pull, and within seconds the boat blew up to full size. She pushed it into the river and jumped in. She had to rescue her friends. Charlie, who was halfway through eating a honey cake, looked up.
"Don't you need this too, Margot?"
He shouted, waving the little boat's paddle. It was too late. Margot was swept away downstream after Sergeant Major and Trampy. "Help!" they all cried together. Wellington heard their cries, and then he saw them rushing towards him on a wave. He splashed across to the middle of the river, and with one mighty bound, he caught hold of Sergeant Major and then Trampy as they rushed past. As Margot came hurtling along in the little boat, Wellington helped Sergeant Major and Trampy to slither over its side to safety, and then held onto the boat as it raced downstream. Eventually, Wellington was able to wade with the little boat to the bank and help his friends onto dry land.
"Well done, Wellington,"
said Sergeant Major. "What a clever idea to bring those emergency supplies too," said Margot, smiling at Sergeant Major. At that moment, Charlie appeared with Sergeant Major's rucksack on his back and the picnic basket in his hands. "Well done, Charlie," said Trampy. "But however did you manage to carry all that by yourself?"
"Well, I did have to eat all the food to make the basket light enough."
Charlie grinned. All was not lost, though. Margot still had some tasty things left to eat in her larder. So they all had their picnic in the safety of the garden at Swan Lake Cottage instead. is the end of the story.